Finley to throw. Over the middle, intercepted. Wolford again. Wolford the other way at the 30, the 40. Wolford to midfield. Miles Wolford with the pick. The Heels on the doorstep of an enormous victory. Williams is the running back next to Howe. Play action. Howe will now lob it down the near side. Newsom with a man all over him. Pins the ball against the back of the defender and brings it in. Heels can get a first down at the 3. Howe, one fake to the right. Now he's going to run to the left. Howe at the 5. Takes the shot. Pinballing off the chains for the touchdown. Sam Howe showing the toughness for 6. Orioles down 4, 35-31. May has the shotgun snap. Pressure coming. Rolls to the right. Throws to the end zone. Touchdown! Touchdown, Antoine Green! 16 seconds to go. No flag. Snapping it off the 8-yard line. May pulls it, tries to roll it apart. Now he's going to throw it and score! Throws it to Payson in the end zone for the touchdown. They are throwing a play left-handed. Was rolling out on the run and threw it left-handed. Bernard fields it at the 26. Heading to the far side. Theo at the 35. Theo, he got the 50. No, he's not. Yes, he is. Theo, he's going to take it for a touchdown. Are you kidding me?
What's going on, guys? Welcome into another edition of the Heel Tough Blog podcast, coming at you guys on a Wednesday night, the night before the start of camp for the Tar Heels in the 2026 season. Of course, just 1 month away from today, Carolina will be kicking off the season in Dublin, Ireland against the TCU Horned Frogs. So still a lot that we got to get you guys ready for. We're going to go through one of the position groups again tonight as we get back on track after some off-field stuff sort of derailed us there earlier in the week. Now we're back on the field, and tonight we'll be talking defensive backs for the Tar Heels this season. A loaded group in terms of the number of guys on the roster, but a very young group that we'll be going through throughout this evening. So make sure that you guys are sticking along with us for that. But before we get to that, we do have the preseason ACC voting that has been released over the last 2 days. And so we'll talk about that here for a minute. The Tar Heels predicted to finish 15th in the ACC this season, easily the lowest that Carolina has ever been projected to finish in a preseason poll since they went to the ACC as one big conference with no divisions back in 2023. That's easily the lowest mark for Carolina. And got to be honest with you, don't remember a lot of times where Carolina was picked to finish at the bottom of the ACC Coastal either. Even during some of their rocky times, you had some pretty bad teams in some of those divisions that, it allowed Carolina to at least be out of the basement. This one, not in the basement, but they're very, very close to the bottom. Not many expectations for this upcoming season. Carolina also without a single player on the All-ACC preseason team for a second straight year. That one, a little more shocking this year, I think, than last year. Last year, hard to know, with so many guys that were being turned over with this roster. You look at one of the guys that we had like huge expectations for, that was Jordan Shipp. He hadn't even really played coming into last year. So a lot of different guys that, are on the roster this year that you felt like maybe had at least a chance. Those guys that made the trip to Charlotte, you felt like Jordan Shipp, Milcard Abujaday at least had a decent opportunity to land on first team All-ACC in the preseason. That doesn't end up happening. But, to me, I think Milcard's probably the most shocking one. I thought he would have had a chance to land there. Did finish second in the conference last year in sacks. It was Akeem Mesidor. I think I said Ruben Bain a few podcasts back was the guy that led the conference in sacks a year ago. That was Akeem Mesidor. He is gone. So the leading returning sack artist in the ACC does not land on the first team All-ACC. I think that's probably significant, but None of the other stuff I think you should really be shocked by with what we've been talking about this preseason.
No, you should not. Although, I don't know if you filled out your ballot or not. I did. I had Carolina. I think they were 13th in my ballot to finish in the ACC, and I had Melcart. I did fill him out for first team All ACC for that edge spot. But that was I think he was the only one that I'm pretty sure I put on my ballot. But this is the reality of the situation when you're coming off a 4-8 season, with the schedule that is depending on who you look at to get your schedule rankings. Like Phil Steele has this as a 13th toughest schedule. There's not a lot of confidence that this team can win more football games, even if they are a better team. And I do think they are a better team. I think they're more talented. I think they are deeper than they were a year ago. This is how this shows up in the voting. I'm not saying that's right. I'm not saying that that's wrong. That's just the reality of the situation. And when you have people that vote for Stanford to get a first place vote in the conference, it's an example that some of these people that are voting should not have a vote because they're not as informed as you would want your voters to be. But not overly surprised to see where Carolina was picked. They're going to be in the bottom half of the league. Melcart, I think, for a guy, and talking about a double-digit sack guy from a year ago, not getting a preseason All ACC mention, it's pretty hard to fathom because that wouldn't happen at a Clemson, Miami, Louisville, a school like that. So, hopefully the locker room, they know what was voted, they know what was said. We know Belichick wants them to block out the noise, but I wouldn't be against them using this as some sort of fuel, some sort of motivation to prove some of the doubters wrong. Because if they're gonna make a bowl game, right, they're gonna have to win. They're gonna have to beat a couple of good ACC teams, and I think if they're gonna make a bowl game, you're gonna have some guys that play at an All ACC caliber level. I think they're guys that are capable of that. I think Melcart's capable. I think Jordan Shipp is capable of doing that. So we just have to ultimately wait and see how this voting or how the season unfolds to see if the voters and the prognosticators were right or if they were wrong.
Yeah, don't even get me started on whoever voted for Stanford to be the team that wins this conference. I look, I had enough issue when I saw 3 people voted for Florida State to win this conference. I mean, Stanford, you got to be the ultimate homer. And I know that we are people that do a Tar Heel podcast. We're a Tar Heel fan podcast. That's how you would classify us. And so you would say, well, aren't you guys sort of homers when you vote on this kind of stuff as well? I try to take it as seriously as just about anybody. I had Melcart in there. I don't think that's the craziest thing when you're leading the conference in sacks in terms of the guys coming back. I don't think it's crazy to have you as a first team All ACC member to begin the year. I have respect for the other guys. I know Clev Lubin was up there for Louisville, who had a really nice year a year ago. And I forget who the other edge rusher was that was up there on the All ACC team. I mean, those guys are good players. I would think that Melcart, based off of what he did last year and how he closed the season, I would feel more comfortable with him being an All ACC guy at the end of the year than those 2 guys. And I also voted for Jordan Shipp because I believe that Jordan Shipp, what he did a year ago, is very reminiscent of what we saw from Anthony Ratliff-Williams. And if he gets even solid quarterback play this season, you're talking about a guy that could have 800, 900, even 1,000 yards receiving this season. You get into that range, you're going to be a guy that's going to be voted on as an All ACC member at the end of the season, potentially first team. Now, look, I wasn't crazy. I had Cooper Barkade. I had Deuce Robinson from Florida State, who's a tremendous receiver. And then I did have Malachi Toney on there. I just didn't list him as a receiver because you could put him as an all-purpose player. That's how I kind of got around it, and that's the way that I end up throwing Jordan Shipp on there because I would have him behind those 3 guys. But still, I think, he definitely deserves a lot of praise going into this year. And I think those are the two guys that you looked at. I know there were a few other guys that were on there. Christo was on there as someone that you could vote for along the offensive line. I did not vote for him because, again, we just don't know what he's going to be, only playing 16 snaps from last season and then, being a guy that transferred up from Holy Cross. And, there are a few other guys that I really like, but I don't think you could vote them preseason All-ACC members. 15th, I'm a little shocked. I thought, I had him at 14th. I thought that maybe they would find a way up there. But, I mean, look, the team that they're in the same neighborhood as in terms of the number of total votes, Syracuse, I can't argue with that. I think Syracuse is probably going to be better than them this year. You look at what they did last year with Steve Angeli when he was healthy. I think that's probably something similar to what they're going to be able to do this year. So, I mean, yeah, it's hard to argue with it, especially with so many questions on this team, especially with so many questions about what's going on off the field. But I think you're right. People do say that a lot. Hey, we're not worried about what people are thinking on the outside. We're going to block out all of that noise. I do think that you can also use some of it as bulletin board material to say, hey, no one is really believing in us. So let's use this as a little bit of a chip on the shoulder. Let's post that graphic that was put out by the ACC. Let's post that on the wall in the locker room and just keep that as a reminder that no one believes in you going into this year. Let's give them a reason to believe in you. So we'll see what it ultimately amounts to, but wasn't shocked, especially with what I heard from a lot of the people. This year. At ACC Media Days for WFNZ, had a lot of the analysts that stopped by and talked with us. Not shocking that a lot of them didn't vote Carolina to have a very successful year, especially with that schedule. So definitely wasn't caught off guard, but hopefully Carolina can overachieve this season. All right, let's get to the defensive back preview. A couple of guys in here that maybe at the end of the season we could talk about having, some recognition in the All-ACC teams, maybe, being honorable mentions at the end of the year. This is a very entertaining and interesting group in the fact that you've got guys that have never really been full-time starters except for one guy in this room. But there's a lot of promise with a lot of these guys. So, yeah, there are still some question marks about what these guys are going to ultimately end up being. But I think you feel really good about a lot of this room. So there's one position in particular that I still have some major questions about. But, let's start with Jaden Patterson. I think that's the guy everybody's going to want to talk about in this room. Jaden Patterson last year, in 473 snaps, finished with 34 total tackles, 2 tackles for loss, an interception, 5 pass breakups, while allowing 24 of his 37 targets to be caught for just 236 yards, and most importantly, 0 touchdowns in 287 coverage snaps. A guy that was sort of forced onto the field, especially after the injury to Thaddeus Dixon, was a relative unknown, a guy that had performed in camp. We had heard some good things about him, and we said, okay, we'll see what this guy brings to the table. I thought for most of the year was Carolina's best defensive back, especially when Thaddeus Dixon was off the field, because, we our feelings on Marcus Allen and some of the other guys that were in that secondary last year. I thought he was definitely a shining light in a room that had its struggles throughout the season. Now the thing is that he's going to be a full-time starter for the entire year. He's probably going to be, handling a little more responsibility. Wouldn't doubt it if he's a guy that faces more big-time receivers than he did a year ago. And so we'll see how he adjusts to that. But this is the guy I feel best about in this defensive back room going into this season.
Yeah, there's no doubt about it. I think this is a guy that if Carolina maybe does surprise, this is a player I think could sneak up and maybe get some All-ACC conversation deep into the season. Was really impressed with him at different points in last year's campaign. You mentioned kind of got thrusted into action due to the injury to Thad Dixon, and I thought he grew up a lot. And I thought the thing that I liked the most was you could feel his physicality at that position, watching whether you were in the stadium, whether you were watching at home. This isn't a guy that I think shies away from contact, willing to be a plus in the run game. Made a couple plays on some screens where he's blowing up the blocker and making the tackle. That's pretty impressive. And so I believe that there's a potential for him to be a really good defensive back for Carolina. I think what you got to like about, as you mentioned, 24 of his 37 targets were caught, but just 236 yards, and they give up a touchdown. So pretty much, yeah, if the ball got caught on him, there was an immediate play that was made. There wasn't the missed tackle. There wasn't the run after catch. There wasn't the big explosive play that followed if he got thrown at. And that's been the big issue with different corners at different times over the last handful of years. And Marcus Allen was certainly one of them. I mean, you go back just to the TCU game. They tried him like on back-to-back plays. In the first play, he made a play. He got up, celebrated. The next play, he got burned for a touchdown. And that was just the nature of his time as a Carolina defensive back, where I think Jaden Patterson offers just some consistency where if he does allow a catch, there will be a play that was made. But for the most part, man, he's not going to be a liability. Can he take away a side of the field? No, not necessarily. But you feel very confident that when he does get targeted, there's going to be a play that's going to be made, and it's going to be made after the immediate catch, as opposed to him fighting 5-10 yards down the field, someone else having to come in and make the tackle. So I love his physicality, love his size, 6'1", $195, and I think this will be a name that ACC football guys will be a lot more familiar with, because we're going to be calling his name a lot this season, and we'll be calling his name a lot in a good way, not in a bad way because he's getting burnt, having missed assignments, so on and so forth.
Yeah, I mean, I don't expect him to be a guy that's going to be targeted 9 times in a game like Marcus Allen was and give up big play after big play. That's the most encouraging thing, right? Is even though he might give up some receptions, a lot of it is in the short passing game. He keeps everything in front of him. 9.8 yards per reception last year, which isn't bad. That's something that you can definitely work with. I think, as long as you're keeping stuff short, I think you can deal with that. I mean, you go back to his first game last year, when he was thrust into starting duty against Clemson. He was targeted 7 times, allowed 5 catches, but only for 38 yards, had 2 pass breakups. I mean, that's a really solid overall start. And from there, he really built on that, had a great midseason stretch against Syracuse. Now, again, remember that game against Syracuse, so tough to really take a lot of credit from that. They didn't throw the ball really at all in that game. Then you had Stanford and Wake Forest. I thought Wake Forest was probably his best game. That was where he looked the most comfortable. Just targeted twice that entire game, allowed just 1 catch for 1 yard. That's the type of performances that you saw from him at certain times last year, and it's why I think he's the leader of this defensive back group. I think now with a little more of a track record, he's going to be able to have much more of a voice in that room, or even just a leader by example. I think that's going to help this group. So I really like him. I think you've got to be careful with how much responsibility you put on him. Last year, played, exclusively as a boundary corner. I think that's probably where he's going to project again this year. So you're not going to be expecting him to have to cover a lot of downfield routes, but I think he's definitely a guy that really gives Carolina a great starting cornerstone piece here at the defensive back spot this season. Another guy that I really liked last year, and I thought really responded to what was a tough first year for him. One of the guys that allowed the most receiving yards in the country in 2024 out of the slot, that was Caleb Cost. Last year, comes back in 480 snaps that he played this past year. He collected 45 total tackles, so a lot of tackles there for a guy in the nickel. You like to see that aggressive participating in the run game, everything like that. 2 tackles for loss, an interception, 5 pass breakups, while allowing 31 of his 45 targets to be caught for just 276 yards. For a slot receiver, those numbers are pretty damn good. Slot receivers are typically going to allow a decent amount of catches, decent amount of yards, because, again, it's all focused on getting the ball out as quickly as possible. But, again, you look at him, 8.6 yards per reception, and you compare it to the year before when he was in the slot, where he allowed 48 of his 70 targets to be caught for 592 yards, 12.3 yards per reception. It also allowed 5 touchdowns the year before that. I think biggest thing for him is going to be penalties. He gets a little bit grabby. That is one thing that really sticks out. He was penalized 6 times last year. He's got to clean that up. But I really thought he took a major step forward last year, and I'm expecting some big things again from him this year.
I don't know if there was a player that was held over from Mac Brown's final season to the first season of Bill Belichick that made more strides than Caleb Cost a year ago. Like, you had some transfers that showed up on the scene. Obviously, the guys like Melcar Abujanade, what he was able to become. And you maybe had some freshmen that obviously stood out in ways that maybe we weren't prepared to, looking at Damon June. But Caleb Cost was bad in 2024. Like, let's just say what it is. Like, we don't gotta sugarcoat it. He was right. Bad. He was not bad last year. As you mentioned, those numbers were really, really good. And you can credit scheme, you can credit better coaching, and I don't want to take that away. It also comes down to just him making the plays and being confident to understand that, hey, the year before, kind of, playing in the same role, gave up a lot of big plays, a lot of yards and touchdowns. The confidence that he has to enter this season with, you have to imagine, is as high as it's been during his whole entire time in college, because of what he was able to do last year, bouncing back after a real difficult year. And here's the important thing: if what Jaden Patterson did last year carries over to this year, and now Caleb Cost, if those two guys, if their production carries over, that's something to really hang your hat on going into this season, where you do have some questions, at that safety spot. And so I think that's something that Bill Belichick, Stephen Belichick really have to like going into this year, is that they know, hey, we got 2 proven commodities that played really high level football for us. And we can expect that to carry over into this year. And was just really proud of the I think, as I mentioned, the mental toughness, the mental fortitude to kind of just stay in there with Caleb Cost for him after such a disastrous previous year, to bounce back the way that he did. And I'm excited to see kind of how does he build off of that? What's the next step for him? But with him and Jaden Patterson, you got to feel really good, at least, about those 2 guys in Carolina's secondary entering this season.
Yeah, couple of moments from him that really stuck out was the fact that he, the game against TCU gets carved up in that one as well. 9 targets for him in that game, 7 receptions, 58 yards, allows a touchdown, does have the interception. But I know that night, we were a lot of the focus was on Marcus Allen, but I think we were both sitting on our seats watching Caleb Cost get picked apart too. And we were saying the same thing. Here we go again. This is going to be the same thing again this year. Carolina's had some really bad luck in recent years with guys in that slot that just allow a ton of yards. But I thought he responded well from that game. And then, has a moment where even after he responds well from that and bounces back, has a good game against Charlotte, okay against Richmond, and decent against Central Florida. Then he has the game where he doesn't start. I assume was benched in the game against Clemson, and we were wondering what is going on here. Why is he not out there? I believe Jaden Patterson actually started the game in the slot for him, and we're thinking, what in the world is going on? Why is he not out there? Is he losing his job? He bounces back from that moment, and really, I thought settled in as the season went along. Had a couple of really nice games. I think probably the best game that you're going to see from him was either the game against Virginia, where he allowed just 2 catches on 6 targets for 7 yards, or the game against Duke, where he allowed 2 catches on his 2 targets for -3 yards. I thought those were 2 spectacular performances from him, and I really think he's going to be able to build on it this season. Don't be shocked if he's a name that also pops up maybe as an honorable mention. Going to be a little bit tougher to earn some respect as a slot corner. Those guys usually don't get talked about nearly as much, but definitely could see him being someone that gets some recognition as the season comes to a close if he performs the way that he did last year. Then you get to where the questions really start. And don't get it wrong. Again, there are guys that I really like here. I lead it off with a guy that I think is, in the limited reps that he played last year, was spectacular. But I think that's the thing, is that he played limited reps last year. Now you're expecting him to take on a full-time role and probably play around 500 or more snaps this upcoming season. And that would be Greg Smith, the safety transfer from Florida last year. In 273 snaps, Smith finished with 25 total tackles and interception, while allowing just 8 of his 14 targets to be caught for 50 yards and 0 touchdowns. I thought they really unlocked him as a weapon starting in that game against Cal. Used him as that hybrid linebacker safety, and from that point on, throughout the season, he was a guy that they utilized in that role very successfully the rest of the year. And I thought he was spectacular in most of the games that he played. He looked like one of the best coverage guys, if not the best coverage guy that Carolina had on the field in most of those circumstances. My thing is that now you're going to expect him to drop back into coverage a little bit deeper. How does he handle playing deeper parts of the field? And you're just asking him to play more snaps. But I will say, I feel really, really encouraged based off what we saw last year that he's going to be able to handle that and play a big role for Carolina this year.
Yeah. A guy we talk a lot about at work, at WFNZ, we talk about the Panthers, is Trayvon Merrick, who plays that safety spot, but is so versatile, can bump up and really be an extra linebacker. And we see how it impacts the Panthers defense. Well, you see the same thing too in college football. And you can see what Greg Smith is capable of. And I think the thing that stands out the most is the size at 6'4", 215 pounds. He's got the length to be able to make those plays, in coverage. But he's not too big to where he can kind of hold his own. If he does have to, if he's playing in that linebacker spot, if he has to, go, step for step with a crosser or something like that, he's not 225 and trying to keep up with him. He's got the quickness to be able to, turn his hips and be able to stay in stride with the receiver. I think what this secondary can be lies in what Greg Smith can be this season. Like if you're talking about playing nearly, double the snaps from what he was at a year ago, as you mentioned, 273. If he gets into that 500 range, and let's just say he doubles the production and tackle total, so he's up there in that 45 to 50 range, I think that could really spell a world of difference for this Carolina secondary. I think 2 things plagued them a year ago that you would hope would be corrected a little bit more going in this year. One, there was obvious communication issues the first half of the year. And it felt like the Cal game was the turning point where that was a lot more cleaner. They also just weren't very athletic across the board in that back end. And I think that's something that they've tried to address. They've tried to fix that. And Greg Smith is a guy that fits that mold where he's more athletic, he's more versatile, being able to bump up and play that linebacker spot if they want him, if they need him to be. And so I really am intrigued to see what the role looks like, what the utilization looks like, and what the production looks like in the season opener against TCU. Because I think if Carolina's going to win the game, they're going to have to score some points. Obviously, they're going to need their defense to play and play well to really give themselves a shot as they're trying to figure out that quarterback spot. If this is a guy that's ready to be an impactful player, I think he can not single-handedly, but really help take that safety position and move it in a positive direction. Maybe the most intriguing player in Carolina's secondary, and excited to see what he does in week 1 against TCU, because if he's ready to take that next step, I think that spells big things for a Carolina defense looking to build off a first successful season last year under Stephen Belichick.
Yeah, and I think the thing that people have to understand is what type of role he's probably going to be used in. I think you're right. I think comparison, we're not saying he's going to be exactly what Trayvon Merrick is. I mean, that's a guy that's borderline Pro Bowler in the NFL, but I think playing him closer to the line of scrimmage is certainly something that you're going to see, because they utilized him as a tackler last year, and he was very helpful in the run game. And again, we don't know what linebacker looks like. Inside Carolina put their projected depth chart up on the defensive side of the ball. They still have questions about whether Derek McDonald is going to lock down that linebacker spot, or if you're going to be playing Jonathan Agamadu there. And so regardless, I mean, you're talking about somebody that I don't know how much trust there is going to be in whoever is playing that secondary linebacker spot. Peyton Seelman will be there, no doubt. But if somebody gets to that second level, you need guys that can make tackles. I feel like that's where Greg Smith is really going to be valuable. And then, what he's able to do in coverage, I think is no small feat what he did last year. And I think he's going to be a guy that is going to adjust well to having to play more of a deep safety role. I think he'll be fine. I don't think, I'm not expecting great. I'm not expecting him to be one of the best in the entire conference. But, hey, if you want to go ahead and be that, then that's fine. I just really liked what I saw from him last year, and I think it's going to translate well this year. Even with that being said, you are going to have guys that probably rotate in, because I don't know if he's somebody that's playing 700 snaps for you on the defensive side of the football this upcoming season. So you got to have other guys that are going to be ready. But I really intriguing, I think, is the best way to put it. He is the guy that I think you should be focused on the most in that season opener in the secondary. Hopefully it's not somebody that's struggling that bad, and that's where our focus is. Good focus. I think it might be Greg Smith. You move on to the other safety spot. This is where it gets interesting, because I have seen a few different people that have had, it's just multiple people here. They have a D. Willie who could possibly factor in here. But I think there's a good chance that it could be Coleman Bryson, the transfer from Minnesota that came in last year, played 225 snaps a year ago, collected 17 total tackles and 2 pass breakups, while allowing 7 of his 11 targets to be caught for 55 yards and a touchdown. Not bad. Not really, in limited snaps, that's about what you would expect from a guy. And I think coverage-wise, actually pretty solid. You could live with those types of numbers. Biggest problem for Coleman Bryson last year, he missed 6 tackles in limited snaps. And you go back to that game against Clemson, man, he had a couple of moments that just left you scratching your head about how is this a guy that's going to be out here playing important reps for Carolina. That was the thing that I think was the most concerning. I mean, look, you can't have a missed tackle rate of 28.6% and expect to be playing significant reps for Carolina throughout the season. If that number stays where it's at, or even somewhere in that neighborhood, it's going to be hard to see him being a guy that Carolina is going to rely on for the entire season. But I think especially out of the gate, this is definitely a name to know for Carolina. You're just hoping that he cleans up some of those tackle issues.
I think that's the big question mark with two of the guys you talked about here. Is you mentioned Bryson, his missed tackle rate, and then you mentioned D. Willie, his missed tackle rate of 20. You round up 24%. You just can't have that. And that's
Yep.
I feel like that's been the biggest issue with the safety position. I don't want to say since, Donnie Miles, when Donnie Miles was a safety that was like a sure tackler, but it kind of does just feel that way where, and we went through a bunch of different defensive coordinators under Mac Brown. Never really got it all figured out, whether it was Bateman, Chizik, Jeff Collins, no matter who it was, they could never really try to figure it out. Now we're sitting here looking at it with Belichick, and you've kind of got some of the same questions. And when you look at that missed tackle rate, and the biggest issue with that is how many times were they put in position to make plays and they didn't finish it.
Yep.
And if you're missing tackles 15, 20 yards down the field, does it still hurt you? Obviously, because now you're giving up, even more explosive plays. But how many more times was it, it felt like in the back half of the season when Carolina's defense really caught on, and we could say they were playing weaker offenses or whatever, but they still played really good football. But how many times were they maybe in position to make plays they didn't, and it impacted the outcome of the game? I think the Wake Forest is a game that you can point back to and say, as well as the defense played, considering how bad the offense was that night, missed tackles ended up, costing them, on a night where their offense didn't have it. And so that, to me, I think is the most important thing, is just becoming a lot more consistent. And there being just more trust that you're going to do your job. And that's the Belichick mantra. That's what he preaches. But here's the thing: if Patterson's doing what he's doing, and you get the same production from Caleb Cost, and Greg Smith turns out to be the Swiss Army knife, but this guy doesn't make the tackle, then none of that crap matters. And you're still giving up explosives. You're still having the issue that's really plagued this defense for the last couple of years. And you can't hide these type of dudes. Like, offenses know it, and so they're going to be put in conflicts, and you're either going to make plays or you're not going to make plays. Maybe a second year in the system, full off season helps. That's what you got to hope for. But if the missed tackle rate doesn't improve, then the same issues will plague this Carolina defense once again.
Yeah, another thing for him that I think is notable is that he has never played more than 263 snaps in a season. So if you're expecting that he's going to be a full-time starter, he's going to have to take a pretty significant leap up. It's going to be interesting to see if he can handle that type of snap count as the season goes along. That's why you want to develop some guys a little further down the depth chart that can play a little bit more. Another guy that is going to factor in here, I think, at some point this season, I think he's going to be much more of a factor than he was in his first season with Carolina. That's Peyton Waters. He played just 33 snaps a year ago and finished with 3 total tackles last year between defense and special teams. But I thought he showed some flashes, particularly in the games against TCU and Clemson. Again, I'm not sure if there was a plan for him to be a guy that only played 4 games and then maybe they were going to use him as a redshirt guy. I don't know if that was necessarily the plan, but he played 16 snaps in the game against TCU. I know there was one game that he had to sit out. I think Richmond he set out with some sort of illness, so I don't know if that sort of factored in either. But he's a guy that now seems fully healthy. I think it showed enough signs last year where he's someone that can at least make some noise this year for Carolina. Was, a talented guy that they pulled from Washington, was a guy that was, I believe, recruited there by Steven Belichick. So there's a reason why he wanted him. There's a reason why he was someone that got on the field, albeit for limited snaps, but 10 snaps as a true freshman for Washington. Maybe this is a guy with another year with Steven Belichick, just another year to adjust to the college level altogether. Maybe he's someone that starts to shine through here for Carolina, because I liked what I saw from him at times last year.
Yeah, wouldn't it be nice to know if if the plan was, hey, we're going to play these handful of guys 4 games, And then we're going to redshirt them because, we're looking more towards 2026, 2027 for them to be, more impactful players. We don't know that. We can speculate, and maybe that's what we hope was the case. Whereas Mac Brown would flat out come out and tell you, hey, this is the plan for this guy, barring injury. But you're right. You're talking about a guy that got recruited to Washington, made the transition with Belichick to Chapel Hill. You're talking about now his third year within the system, second year, playing on the East Coast. He's going to be as familiar with the system as he's going to possibly be, and maybe he's ready to be a back end guy that improves the communication. And I think that was something that was really key last year for Carolina. When you look at some of their coverage busts at the beginning of the year, it was just simply lack of communication. Well, where does that start? That starts in practice. And that means that you didn't have great communicators top to bottom in your secondary room. There's value in just being a guy that helps get everybody organized, get everybody set. They know the play. They know their responsibility. So I think if you have some struggles from Coleman Bryson, this is a chance where he can carve out a bigger role than maybe you're anticipating, considering the fact he just played in 4 games, played just 33 snaps, and recorded just 3 tackles a year ago. And I think maybe a name to monitor as we get into camp tomorrow. We'll get, it'll be limited, but we'll get some press availability from Bill Belichick. We'll get some press availability from the coordinators. If his name is popping up, maybe more than maybe you're anticipating going into the start of the season.
Yeah, I think one thing that you're really looking for is, maybe a little bit of exposure. Maybe they do allow the media to get a look at some of the 7-on-7, 11-on-11 type stuff, and you get some nuggets about Peyton Waters in there, and maybe he's a guy that's sticking out. Look, I don't expect him to be a starter for Carolina. I don't expect that's going to be the role that he's necessarily going to be in, but can he be a guy that becomes a rotational piece for Carolina in that secondary? Maybe jump somebody on the depth chart. I think it's possible. I think he's talented enough to be able to do that. So I'm really intrigued with him. There's a couple other guys at the safety position that we'll talk about here a little bit later that I think stick out as well. But definitely think Peyton Waters is a name to know going into camp at the safety position that could possibly factor in for reps. You then get to the corner spot opposite of Jaden Patterson. And this is where you start to get some of the questions. Really, it starts with just who is actually battling for this role. D. Willie, again, I've seen him mocked to so many different spots all over the secondary. Phil Steele has him in the nickel corner spot, has Caleb Koss moving outside. I don't think that's going to happen. Inside Carolina, in their depth chart that they released, they have a D. Willie as a guy that's going to play free safety. I think he's probably going to be a guy that they're going to look to play on the outside. Just because of the experience that Coleman Bryson has, I think they might go with the most experienced group. And if they're doing that, then a D. Willie is going to be a guy that probably starts at that cornerback spot opposite of Jaden Patterson. Thing is, though, I could get if they want to go in a different direction there. I kind of do as well. I think if Jalen Thompson shows you anything, then that's the guy that you end up rolling with. But a D. Willie, you look at the 2 years that he played outside at corner, 2023, 2024. He allowed 17 catches for 17 catches on 23 targets for 337 yards and 4 touchdowns. Talk about a guy that's just letting up big play after big play. That's exactly what's going on there. And that's one of the biggest concerns that Carolina dealt with a year ago. You talked about communication being a big part of it. Willie, that could be part of his issue as well, but it could also be that he's just not a great coverage guy on the outside. He doesn't work well against guys that have speed, and that's something that you're trying to avoid having issues with that again this year. We dealt with that the last handful of years with Marcus Allen. You're looking for somebody to be a little bit more consistent than what we saw from Marcus Allen in his time in Chapel Hill. As you mentioned earlier, talking about him, even if you want to play him at safety, struggles with tackling really concern you there. 23.7% missed tackle rate in his career. Again, that part of that is because he is somebody that only plays that has only played limited snaps. He has never been a full-time starter, never played more than 187 snaps in a season for Michigan State. But even still, when you've got a missed tackle rate that's that high, he has never had a missed tackle percentage lower than 20% in the 3 years that he played major snaps. Probably not a good sign, and definitely something that concerns you if that's one of your guys starting in the season opener against TCU.
Yeah, I think I want Jalen Thompson to emerge as that guy at the spot. Obviously, those you mentioned, we've got to figure out what they're doing with the D Willie and where they're looking to play him. But even though Thompson is smaller, he's 5'11", $185. Willie's 6'1", and weighs a little bit more. I think I'd just rather see what I have in Jalen Thompson as opposed to trying to see if a D Willie is going to improve upon what he has proven to be at his previous stop. And look, maybe a fresh start, clean slate, better mindset, better. Maybe he fits the scheme better. Maybe there's a better football player there. Just I've seen enough of him to know that there's a lot of inconsistent play to his nature. In the missed tackling thing is just something that for me, as you mentioned, no lower than 20%. I mean, that's pretty at that point. That's telling you who you are as a football player. That means you can't tackle. And so I'm not saying that I have a whole bunch of confidence that Jalen Thompson is going to be, so much better. I would just rather try to figure out what we have in him. He played a little over 110 snaps a year ago, as opposed to figuring out, what a D Willie could possibly be. That's just me. I would imagine maybe we see some rotation from those two guys in that first game against TCU. If Willie is trying to play corner, but I wouldn't be surprised if by the time we get back from Dublin, maybe after the first home game, whatever it is, if Jalen Thompson has emerged as that corner opposite Jaden Patterson.
Yeah, and look, Jalen Thompson could just beat him out right out of camp. I mean, that's certainly possible as well. Jalen was battling in the spring to win that second cornerback job opposite of Jaden Patterson. I think it's more than possible that he ends up being that guy. A D Willie is just one of those guys. I think you brought him in because he's got some experience. He's played at the power conference level before, albeit not a ton. It's not as experienced as some of the other guys that you probably could have gotten out of the transfer portal that would have been more sure things. But you never know. Maybe this was the move that they ultimately wanted, just adding another veteran in this room to add a little competition for Jalen Thompson. They might have liked what they saw from Jalen late last year and some of the reps that he took on the field. And then, of course, in the Sunday night football practices that they had as well. So maybe that was ultimately what their goal was. I think something that I'd like to see is, yes, if you're going to use a D Willie, use him out of the gate, and then hopefully someone emerges later on down the line, whether it is Jalen Thompson, whether it's one of the true freshmen that starts to emerge. Somebody that would probably be the best case scenario. I don't think that he's going to be someone that stands out. Main thing that you're just asking from him is, look, if you're on the field, just don't be the guy that's sticking out because you're playing so poorly. Don't be the guy that's missing tackles all over the place and we're complaining about you. Don't be the guy that's giving up big play after big play in coverage and we're spending podcasts breaking down how bad you were. That's what we're trying to avoid here. So I'll be interested to see. I'm with you. I would love for Jalen Thompson to emerge, but when you look at his numbers last year, 8 targets, 5 catches allowed, 63 yards. it's okay, but I think you're hoping that it's going to be even a little bit better than that, and that he can just limit some of the big plays over the top. That's the main thing that you're looking for from this position, opposite of your best corner and the leader of your secondary. Another guy that's really interesting here is the former 4-star prospect, Kenton Dobson. One of the guys I really loved in this past class. I think he's someone that could stand out here as well. Didn't really hear a lot about him in the spring. Heard more about Adi Willie and Jalen Thompson. And, Kenton Dobson is not a guy that it looks, according to Inside Carolina, as someone that is going to be battling for a starting job coming in this year. But this could be a guy that, just because of the pure talent, emerges as the season goes along, could be someone that we start to talk about. And, especially if there are struggles from Willie and Thompson, they could just say, hey, we're going to throw this guy out there and see what he's got. What's to lose? Let's learn about whether or not this is someone that's going to be there for us later on down the line, or, what exactly we have in this player. So definitely a name that's worth keeping an eye on. Two other guys that I think really are expected to at least be in the rotation at the start of the year, or rather in the conversation to be in the rotation. I think all those guys that we just mentioned, probably a part of the rotation, maybe outside of Dobson, but even Dobson, I think, could factor in early in the season and get some rotational reps. Then you've got Javion Butts, who I think is sort of battling to be a guy that gets some of those rotational reps at safety. Played 95 total snaps a year ago, 51 on defense, 44 on special teams. Finished with 7 total tackles and allowed his lone target to be caught for 19 yards. I thought, last year, thrown into some games late in the season, played some important snaps, not a ton of snaps, but important snaps. And I thought, wasn't getting killed, wasn't a guy that we came back and were saying, oh, why is this guy on the field? I think he's someone to, at least keep in mind as potentially a part of the rotation. But I don't see him being a guy that's probably going to play major reps out of the gate, just judging off of some of the buzz that's coming out of the spring.
No, probably not. But there's something to be said about having these depth guys that can, if they're making their biggest impact on special teams. But injuries are part of the game. There's gonna be attrition, you would imagine, and it is their depth here, I think, is something that they're trying to definitely build and establish. You'll run through some of the recruiting stuff here in a minute, because they've definitely added to this room for the future. But you also need guys for the here and now. So he may just be a depth piece that's playing in games that are decided, but there could be a situation where a couple guys get banged up, he gets thrusted into the action. And as you mentioned, when that happened last year, he just didn't get, it felt like he just did the best of the job to the best of his ability, but we weren't having to come on here and complain about him not being ready to play. Like he wasn't a negative that stood out in a major way. And that's important. That's a lot better than us having to come on here and talk about him for 10, 15 minutes when we're recapping a loss or something and saying, hey, this guy not being up to snuff was a real reason why Carolina lost the game. So you're going to see him more on the special team side, but there could be a scenario where his name does get called upon. And if he can kind of just be the consistent player he was a year ago, that's a lot more impactful than I think people realize.
Yeah, played 21 snaps against Duke, 17 against NC State. Again, that was probably the point in the season where Carolina was just, hey, let's throw some guys out there, see what ultimately shows up on film. And I thought for the most part was all right. Didn't grade out great in run defense, but I certainly thought was a guy that handled his own, did what he had to do. And as a true freshman, that's really what you could expect from a guy that wasn't expected to do much last year. So that's fine. And maybe he becomes a part of the rotation. Maybe he has to wait until next year. But still, I do think he's a guy that's at least worth keeping in the back of your mind. Same thing with Trey Miller, 117 snaps last year. collected 13 total tackles, which you like. Allowed 14 of his 15 targets to be caught for 153 yards. You don't like that. Those numbers carry over this year. He ain't going to be playing. They're not going to put him out there. That's just way too many catches, way too many yards for him as a nickel corner. But that will be the backup there to Caleb Cost in the slot if there is somebody that goes down. I could also see them playing a D. Willie in that role as well. So might be the third option there, but certainly a name because of how much he played last year that's at least worth keeping on the brain. Then you get to some of the guys. This is really where you get to the deeper depth on the roster. I don't expect these guys to be competing for rotational roles this year, at least out of the gate, maybe as the year goes along with some of these true freshmen. We can discuss that. But you've got, a guy that was on the roster a year ago after transferring from UCLA. That would be Christian Dunbar Hawkins. That's certainly a name that has popped up. See him, in some of the three deeps as a guy that could provide a little bit of extra depth for Carolina on the outside at corner, redshirt sophomore. So has a little bit more experience at the college level, being in camps and everything like that. So should be settled into the college life by this point. Another guy, Reggie Love the second. This is a guy that was a former walk-on holdover from Mac Brown and his time at Carolina. So stuck it out and, again, has been around a lot of camps. I mean, he's a redshirt junior, so he has been around a lot of camps. Biggest thing for him is that, 5'8", 175 pounds. At 5'8", it's going to be really tough to have you out there playing, but you never know. I mean, he is a guy that did play some snaps last year in some of the games that Carolina played against Richmond. I know he was in that game, and he may have played in the game against Charlotte as well. So I never know. Could see him factor in for Carolina in that game against East Tennessee State. Only played in the game against Richmond, but did play 15 snaps and made some plays. Made some plays when he was out there. Then you get to the freshmen in this room. Jacob Witherspoon, former four-star prospect in this past year's class, actually the highest rated player in this past year's class, according to Rivals and On3. He was a guy ranked inside of the top 150, 5'11", so a little bit shorter of a player. Even at the safety spot, I do think that is something that sticks out. 165 pounds, so light. But again, when you're that short, I do think that your body being built, a certain way is a little bit different. I wouldn't be shocked if as the season goes along, he's someone that emerges. I really loved everything that I saw from him on his high school film, and I think he's going to be a very valuable piece for Carolina in the future. David Davis, former high-end three-star prospect, really liked his versatility. Thought he was a guy that could play either corner or safety. On the depth chart that I have, that I am going to release to you guys later on this evening when we have the position preview that goes live for you guys, I do have him a little as a safety, as one of the deeper depth safeties there. But again, talent will potentially show through on that one, and you could see him later in the year. Also really like Julian Patterson, former high-end three-star prospect, was committed to Penn State at one point. Like what I see from him. I think he's someone that really fits in well on the outside and could be someone that, starts to really get his feet below him here in fall camp after being someone that was with the team back in the spring. I think that'll be very advantageous for him to potentially see more of a responsibility as the year goes along. I mean, 6'2", 183 pounds. You love the length that he brings outside there at corner. So certainly someone that could stick out there. You got Xavier Jackson, another former high-end three-star prospect. Love the measurables on him as well. Above 6 foot, 6'1", 188 pounds. So certainly someone that we could see here, sort of emerge maybe here in fall camp, maybe further on down the line. Jamarian Gordon, mid-level three-star prospect, who I really liked coming out of high school. Again, versatility, name of the game with him, could play corner, did at the high school level in his final year. Also played some safety. I think that's probably more the position that Carolina is going to look to use him at. But certainly someone that you love whenever guys have versatility that they can bring. Jaziel Hart, another mid-level prospect. I think he's a guy that at his size, 5'11", 180 pounds, maybe projects more in the slot. But I do think also at 5'11", we talked about, that being Jalen Thompson's height, could be a guy that could play on the outside too. So again, a little versatility that he brings there. Julian Burns, former mid-level 3-star prospect, was very interested to see where Carolina would play him because he was a guy that sort of played a hybrid linebacker safety at the high school level. Looks like he's going to be locked in to play safety for Carolina, at least out of the gate, but could be a guy that learns a lot from someone like Greg Smith. That would be someone that he could learn a lot from. So interested to see how his career pans out. And then you got 2 redshirt freshmen that are on the roster. These are guys that didn't really play a lot last year, really fit into that mold of they would have been former walk-ons, but are guys that are just on the end of the roster, guys that weren't a part of last year's recruiting class officially, but were added before the team got into fall camp. That would be Jermaine Anderson, played 6 snaps on special teams, and then Graham Ranches, who did not play a single snap a year ago, but could also factor in. I mean, you look at the amount of freshmen in this room. I think that's one thing that really sticks out is that a lot of the deeper depth doesn't have a lot of experience, but I think boatloads of talent here that could end up paying off for Carolina down the line.
Yeah, I think this is the room that they're wanting to build their foundation through the high school recruiting ranks. When you factor in, you brought in, a handful of freshmen, as opposed to going through the transfer portal route, but a bunch of guys that were, as you mentioned, high end 3 stars, even some mid-level 3 stars. But I think if Belichick is committed to this thing for the long haul, and I think until something happens, we need to assume that's the case. I think this is a room that you maybe expect him to kind of build up in a way that, we talked about at the very beginning of the episode, just has really played Carolina here recently through multiple different defensive coordinators. And I bet you, during his time around the program and when he's gone back and evaluated film, he's probably been able to see that. And so, we've seen different areas on this roster with this big recruiting class where they've attacked high school recruiting. They did a lot of it in the trenches, and now this secondary room shows up in a big way. And so a lot of these guys that you just mentioned here, are we going to call their names a lot this year? More than likely, no. But these could be guys, maybe not even in 2027, but by the time they're juniors in 2028 or redshirt sophomores, whatever classification they're necessarily going by, they're going to be ready to make an impact for Carolina's secondary. So hopefully we're not developing these guys for someone else. Hopefully we get to develop these guys and we get to see that development pay off in their time in Chapel Hill. Ultimately, you have to see how that plays out, but I think you have to like their approach to it, getting the type of, just raw talent that you need in this room, and then that type of talent that you like to think, hey, with their coaching prowess, their ability to develop talent, these guys can develop either into ACC starters or quality depth pieces in this conference. And, if that's the case, we'll see that pay off probably in a year or two.
Yeah, I mean, very interesting group that they brought in, because you got 8 guys that you brought in from the high school ranks. Not a single one of the guys that I mentioned ranked outside of the top 1,000. Usually when you bring in that many guys, you're going to throw a couple of guys at the back end that are just really extra adds. No, all of these guys are mid-level 3 stars ranked inside of the top 900 in the country. So there's a lot of talent there. And it's just how much time does it take for that to sort of show through is going to be the interesting question. But in terms of this year's roster, yeah, you just never know. There could be a guy that sort of jumps out here as the season goes along and all of a sudden really shows up and becomes a big part of what Carolina does. even if it doesn't happen, it's okay. As long as these are guys that we still feel like are progressing along, and don't enter the transfer portal at the end of the year because they feel like things are heading in the right direction and they're going to have a chance to contribute sooner rather than later. I think that's the most important thing. So that's going to wrap it up for our look at the defensive backs, guys. One more position preview that we will be doing. We won't be doing it here tonight. We will, unfortunately, I was hoping to get it done before the start of camp, but with the podcast that we had to do the other night, we just weren't able to get it in, but we will do special teams. And, the good news is that maybe there will be some questions that will be asked about this unit tomorrow. There are no answers about special teams. Basically, any of the stuff that I read from spring practice, either from Inside Carolina or from Tar Heel 24/7, they just didn't get a look at those guys. And so they couldn't really give you any nuggets on what happened in spring practice. There really hasn't been anything given by head coach Bill Belichick on that front either. And when he was asked about it in the breakout room, I heard him say it is open competition at this point. All those spots are up for grabs. So we know really nothing about that room, but we're going to do our best to talk about the guys that are in that room and get you ready for that. Keep an eye out. That'll be coming up probably either Friday or over the weekend. We'll have that edition of the podcast for you guys. And then that'll be it. We'll be done with the position previews for this year, and we'll be focusing on what's going on in camp and getting you ready for the season opener against TCU, which, again, as I said earlier in this episode, is exactly a month away from today. That's just shocking to believe that we are that close with how hectic this offseason has been. At this point, that's just every college football offseason. There's never a downtime anymore, but ready for it, no doubt about that, to get to the start of the season and just see what this team ultimately looks like on the field. We'll have you covered on the website, HeelToughBlog.com, with all that. As I mentioned, going to put up the position previews article for the defensive backs here after I post the audio edition of this. So, 9:30 or so, it should be up for you guys to be able to check out. And then I'll share it into all the groups and everything like that. But, go ahead, check that out. As I mentioned, there's a lot of good information in there about the guys, especially ones that will be major contributors this year for Carolina, but also the projected depth chart that I have there at all 5 positions in this defensive back room. You definitely don't want to miss that. So make sure you're checking all that out. Do the same with all the other position groups that we've done so far, and special teams. We'll have one coming up for that as well to close us out on the website side of things in the same fashion. So plenty of that stuff up there for you guys to check out. We've got all the latest that we know with Michael Lombardi, and the HR complaint against him that has led to a paid administrative leave. We've got that information up there on the website. I'm trying to figure out a little bit more on the CSC side of things because there are a lot of conflicting reports on that front. There are some people that say the investigation's already happening. There's some people that say it's going to happen at some point. There's other people that say that that's a whole bunch of nothing. So I'm trying to figure out what exactly is going on with that before I post anything on the website. If we get any big-time news on that front, of course, I will be keeping you guys updated on that front as well because, we're going to cover those storylines just like the podcast edition that we did the other night. We're not going to ignore that and act like that stuff isn't happening. We're going to make sure that we're tackling that stuff on top of getting you ready for this upcoming season. So make sure you go back, check out that edition of the podcast that we did the other night as well. Would greatly appreciate that. And let us know your thoughts on Michael Lombardi. Should he be a guy that Carolina's looking to keep around, or are you ready to just move on? Same thing, at this point with Bill Belichick. How are you feeling about all this stuff that keeps happening off the field? Make sure you guys go and let us know how you're feeling on that front over there on that last edition of the podcast. While you're there, make sure you subscribe to the YouTube page. Really pushing that again for our viewers and even our listeners, if you could, even if you're just someone that's going to listen to the podcast, just going over and hitting subscribe on YouTube is huge for us. We would greatly appreciate it. Again, trying to get to 1,000 before the season starts or shortly thereafter. So, we're counting on you guys to help us get there. It's something that, is very important in terms of looking for sponsors and everything like that down the line. So we would greatly appreciate if you could do that for us. And when you do that, the thing is that not only do you get our the Heels Up Blog podcast that covers football, you get the Four Corners podcast that covers basketball as well. So you can check that out over there on the Heels Up Blog YouTube page. Same thing with the social medias at Heels Up Blog on Twitter, at Heels Up Blog on Facebook. Make sure that you guys are following us on both of those accounts. And it really is a direct stream to all of our content. That's the only thing that we post on those pages. So if you want the articles, the podcast editions, all that stuff, and none of the other stuff that's going on out there, then that is the best way to follow along with us. But that's going to wrap it up for this edition of the podcast. Want to thank Josh for hosting with me. Want to thank you guys for watching and listening. And as always, go Tar Heels.